Hello and welcome to Lamplighter. Today is December 12. Today in our daily Bible reading, we continue to follow Paul as he has now gone back to Jerusalem. A riot of sorts is stirred up against him by fellow Jews. There are people who do not like what Paul is doing. There are people among his own countrymen who do not like what he is saying. And so they're trying to kill Paul. They're trying to turn crowds against him. And we saw a riot almost ensued there in Jerusalem in yesterday's reading. Finally, Paul appeals for the commander to send him from Jerusalem to Caesarea in order to get some sort of fair trial because he is a Roman citizen and they have not treated him fairly. They've made accusations that have not been proven, and they've even attempted to flog him for something they have no proof of him doing. So now in today's reading, we see Paul journeying to Caesarea. 5 days later, the high priest Ananias went down to Caesarea with some of the elders and a lawyer named Tertullus, and they brought their charges against Paul before the governor. When Paul was called in, Tertullus presented his case before Felix. Now, Felix is the governor at this time who's hearing the case. And so all kinds of accusations that are unprovable are going to be made. By examining him yourself, Tertullus says, you'll be able to learn the truth about all these charges we are bringing against him. And the Jews all joined in the accusation, asserting that these things were true. And again, just hearsay, things that are being said, fingers that are being pointed, but no evidence whatsoever. And so Paul is given an opportunity once again to defend himself. And so Paul replied, I gladly make my defense. You can easily verify that no more than 12 days ago, I went up to Jerusalem to worship. My accusers did not find me arguing with anyone at the temple or stirring up a crowd in the synagogues or anywhere else in the city, and they cannot prove to you the charges they are now making against me. However, I admit that I worship the God of our fathers as a follower of the way. I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man. There are some Jews from the province of Asia who ought to be here before you and bring charges if they have anything against me. So Paul is making it very clear that he thinks these charges are unfounded. He says you can check the evidence for yourself. I went up to Jerusalem to worship. I've not done any of those things about which I am being accused. And those that are accusing the loudest are not even here to make their accusations in person. And so Felix adjourned the proceedings. He said, when Lysias the commander comes, I will decide your case. He ordered the centurion to keep Paul under guard, but to give him some freedom and permit his friends to take care of his needs. So Felix is showing some favor toward Paul. Several days later, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was a Jewess. He sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Christ Jesus. Paul's topic is always the same. He speaks about faith in Christ Jesus, and as Paul discoursed on righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid. And he said, that's enough for now. You may leave. When I find it convenient, I will send for you. Paul was getting a little bit too close to home. We might say today he was starting to step on Felix's toes just a little bit. So Felix wants to hear no more of it. He says, you go away. When it's a more convenient time, I'll call for you and listen some more. How many people today even make that same excuse? I don't want to hear it now. I'm not ready to hear it now. So when it's more convenient to me, then maybe I'll listen. At the same time, Felix was also hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe. So he sent for him frequently and talked with him. But when 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded in his job by Porcius Festus. But because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison. So Paul's been in prison for 2 years because of accusations that have never been proven. And again, he's a Roman citizen. And they're treating him this way. That's opposed to Roman law. Now, the chief priests and the Jewish leaders, when they see that a leadership change has happened from Felix to Porcius Festus, they appeared before Festus and presented the charges against Paul. They urgently requested Festus as a favor to them to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. So here they go again, yet another conspiracy to take Paul's life. But after spending 8 or 10 days with them, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day he convened the court and ordered that Paul be brought before him. When Paul appeared, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many serious charges against him. Again, notice this, which they could not prove. So Paul is appearing before Festus, and he makes his defense. I've done nothing wrong against the law of the Jews, or against the temple, or against Caesar, answering all of the accusations that are being made against him. Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, "Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges?" Now remember, Jerusalem is a hotbed where there have been several conspiracies already to kill Paul. So Paul answered, "I'm now standing before Caesar's court, where I ought to be tried. I have not done any wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. However, if I am guilty of doing anything deserving death, I do not refuse to die. But if the charge is brought against me by all of these accusers, by these Jews, if those charges are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar." After Festus had conferred with his council, he declared, "You've appealed to Caesar you will go." Well, then we read a few days later, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to visit Festus, to pay their respects to him. And Festus, in the meantime, discusses Paul's case with Agrippa. And Agrippa becomes very interested. He wants to hear Paul for himself. He's curious and wants to hear what Paul has to say. So he says to Festus, "I'd like to hear this man myself." And Festus says, "Okay, tomorrow you will hear him." So the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp and entered the audience room with the high-ranking officers and the leading men of the city. And at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. And Paul is going to be given the floor, so to speak. And this is where Festus says to Agrippa, "I need to write a letter when I send him back, and I don't really have anything to accuse him of." He says, "I have nothing definite to write to his majesty about him. Therefore, I've brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that as a result of this investigation, I may have something to write. For I think it's unreasonable to send on a prisoner without specifying the charges against him." You see, Paul, as a Roman citizen, has appealed to Caesar, and Festus is obligated to send him to Caesar, but he must send a letter with the charges that have been made. And he's saying, "I'm beside myself. I don't see any reason to write. I don't see any accusations that can be made." And so he's asking for Agrippa's opinion. So Agrippa said to Paul, "You have permission to speak for yourself." And here, once again, Paul is going to tell his story about his conversion experience on the road to Damascus. And he talks about Jesus encountering him and saying, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. Now get up and stand on your feet. I have appeared to you to appoint you as a servant and as a witness of what you have seen of me and of what I will show you." Jesus, still speaking to Paul, says, "I will rescue you from your own people and from the Gentiles. I am sending you to them to open their eyes, to turn them from darkness and into the light, and from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. I say nothing," Paul says, "beyond what the prophet and Moses said would happen, that the Christ would suffer, and as the first to rise from the dead, would proclaim light to his own people and to the Gentiles." And at this point, Festus interrupts Paul, and he says, "You're out of your mind, Paul," he shouted. "Your great learning is driving you insane." "I am not insane, most excellent Festus," Paul replied. "What I'm saying is true and reasonable." "King Agrippa," Paul asks, "do you believe the prophets?" "I know you do." And then Agrippa said that famous line, "Do you think that in such a short time you will persuade me to be a Christian?" Paul replied, "Short time or long, I pray God that not only you, but all who are listening to me today may become what I am, except for these change." these chains. Agrippa acknowledges that Paul is innocent, but because he has appealed to Caesar, he's going to have to go to Caesar. Agrippa even says if he had not appealed to Caesar, he would be set free because there are no charges against him that will stick. So Paul wins the case, so to speak, but now he'll ultimately be going to Rome to appear before Caesar. Isn't it great to be a lamplighter? His word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. I hope you have a blessed day.